20 here, so it's already evening there, and I mean, look at this. I think it's beautiful. It's all lit up inside, and it's been a all eyes on Capitol Hill type of day. So I'm going to take you back to the Senate floor where Bernie Sanders is talking. Let's take a listen.
Wealthy campaign contributor, you do have a whole lot to celebrate. And maybe if you're one of the 6,000 lobbyists here in Washington, D.C., who helped write the bill, I guess they're celebrating a lot today. But if you are one of the vast majority of the American people who are in the middle class, you should not be celebrating today, and in fact, you should be pretty nervous. The passage of this legislation marks a great victory for the Koch brothers and other wealthy campaign contributors who will see, at a time of massive income and wealth inequality, huge tax breaks for themselves. In other words, the wealthiest people will become much wealthier. Meanwhile, the deficit, what is owed by our kids and our grandchildren, will increase by $1.5 trillion as a result of this bill. And the largest and most profitable corporations, companies like Apple, Microsoft, Pfizer, General Electric, who despite record-breaking profits, they are going to see very, very large tax breaks to the tune of many billions of dollars. Now, at a time when the very wealthy are becoming much richer, tens of millions of American families are struggling to keep their heads above water economically. 40 million Americans are living in poverty. The Nonpartisan Tax Policy Center tells us that in terms of this legislation, 83% of the tax benefits will go to the top 1% by the end of the decade. 83% of the tax benefits go to the top 1% who are already doing phenomenally well. 60% of the benefits will go to the top 1/10 of 1%. Meanwhile, at the end of 10 years, some 92 million middle-class households will be paying more in taxes. And then on top of all of that, as the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people, this bill will result in 13 million Americans losing their health insurance. And I understand the president was really excited about this. Hey, what a great day. 13 million more Americans are losing their health insurance when we are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people. But with the ending of the individual mandate, what all of the experts tell us is that health care premiums will go up. So if you're an average person out there, your health care premiums will very likely go up as a result of this legislation. Meanwhile, starting next year, I'm not talking about 10 years from now, starting next year, some 8 million middle-class families will pay more in taxes. Doesn't it say a lot about Republican priorities when they make permanent the tax breaks for corporations? Those are permanent, and yet they make temporary the tax breaks for working families, which will expire in 8 years. Furthermore, I would hope that every American is listening closely to what Speaker of the House Paul Ryan is talking about. And I have to give Ryan credit for being pretty honest about the intentions of the Republican Party. Just this morning, he was on ABC saying what he has said for quite a while, and that is that the Republican plan is a two-step approach. Step number one, passing the legislation that passed last night here and today in the House. Step number two is having run up a deficit of $1.5 trillion. They are now going to come back and offset that deficit by making massive cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. According to Ryan, they got a two-step program. Step one, massive tax breaks to the rich and large corporations, run up the deficit by $1.5 trillion. Step number two, offset that deficit by cutting Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. How unspeakable and outrageous is this plan? How much does it go against what the American people want? Giving huge tax breaks to billionaires, to the Trump family, to the Koch brothers, and then paying for those tax breaks by cutting Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Mr. President, there are millions of senior citizens and people with disabilities in Vermont and all across this country who today are struggling to buy food, to heat their homes, to buy the prescription drugs they need because they're trying to survive on $12,000, $13,000, $14,000 a year Social Security. There are people who have worked their entire lives and have exhausted themselves as they approach retirement. Do not tell those people who live on $12,000, $13,000 a year Social Security that you're going to cut their benefits through a chained CPI or some other mechanisms in order to give tax breaks to billionaires. How outrageous that would be. Don't tell older workers, many of them with health problems, having worked 20, 30, 40 years, that you're going to give billions of dollars in tax breaks to Microsoft, Pfizer, or General Electric, but then you're going to ask them to work more years in order to be eligible for Medicare. Mr. President, I understand that every member of the Congress would like to go home for the holiday season, and so would I. This is the time of year where Vermont is really very, very beautiful. But the truth is that it would really be unconscionable for us to leave Washington after giving tax breaks to billionaires and large corporations while we ignore the enormous problems facing the middle class and working families of our country. Mr. President, when Donald Trump ended the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, the DACA program, nearly 800,000 lives were thrown into chaos and uncertainty. Without the legal protections afforded by the DACA program, hundreds of thousands of young people today are living in terrible fear and anxiety about losing the legal status that they currently have in the only country that they have ever known. These are young people who have grown up in the United States, gone to school in the United States, are working in the United States, are in our military. This is their home. It would be unspeakable to take away their legal status and subject them to deportation. Since the President's announcement in September, more than 11,000 people have already lost their protections under DACA, with approximately 22,000 set to lose their legal protections by the March 5th, 2018 deadline. Mr. President, these are hundreds of thousands of wonderful young people. We cannot turn our backs on them. We must deal with DACA before we leave for the holiday break. Any end-of-the-year spending agreement must address the fear and uncertainty caused by the administration's reckless actions, and a Clean Dream Act must be signed into law. Now, this is not just what Bernie Sanders wants. This is what the American people in overwhelming numbers want. A Quinnipiac poll came out just the other day in which 77% of the American people supported maintaining legal status for these young people and allowing them to move forward towards citizenship. 77%, and that is consistent with other polls that have been taken. A vast majority of Democrats, of Republicans, of independents understand that it would be incredibly cruel and harmful to our country in so many ways to deny legal status to the Dreamers. We cannot turn our backs on the Dreamers. We must address their crisis right now. Mr. President, it has been almost 3 months since funding for community health centers have lapsed. Our nation's 1,400 community health centers serve more than 27 million people in roughly 10,000 communities throughout this country. In my own state of Vermont, 1 out of 4 Vermonters get their primary health care, dental care, low-cost prescription drugs, mental health counseling at a community health center. How does it happen that the Republican leadership can spend months on a bill to give tax breaks to billionaires, but not address the lack of funding, the reauthorization of the Community Health Center program or the Children's Health Insurance Program, which provides health care to 9 million children? Mr. President, right now in this country, there are 1.5 million workers and retirees in multi-employer pension plans who could see the pensions that they work for their entire lives cut by up to 60%. People were promised these pensions a few years ago. In a disastrous act, Congress took away that promise, and working people could lose the pensions they were promised through up to 60% cuts in those pensions. Congress needs to act before the end of the year to make sure that no one in America in a multi-employer pension plan will see their pensions cut. Those are real issues impacting real people, but there are more. There was an article recently in the Washington Post, and what it said is that because of major cuts to the Social Security Administration, people with disabilities are not getting their claims processed in a timely manner. The result was that in 1 year, if you can believe it, 10,000 people with disabilities died before they got their claims processed. What the Republicans have been very active on is making sure that the Social Security Administration does not get the funding they need, which means that it is harder for people who have retired, people who have disabilities to get the information that they need or the claims that they have processed, get them processed in a timely manner. We must make sure that every senior and person with disability gets treated with dignity. We've got to restore adequate funding to the Social Security Administration. Mr. President, one of the great outrages that currently is taking place in this country, and it really is quite beyond belief, is that at a time when we live in a competitive global economy and when we need the best educated workforce in the world to be able to do the new jobs that are being created, which require more education, we have over 40 million people in our country, 40 million, who have left college or graduate school in debt, and sometimes deeply in debt. I'm talking about people I have met who have gone to medical school or dental school, $400,000 in debt. People graduate college, $150,000 in debt. This is a crisis that is impacting millions of people. It's impacting our entire economy. It is an issue that must be addressed. Maybe, just maybe, before we give tax breaks to billionaires, we might want to significantly lower the debt burden that so many people in this country have in their student debts. Mr. President, again, this is the year 2017, soon to be 2018. This is the wealthiest country in the history of the world. And yet there are communities in Vermont, communities in Utah, communities all over this country that do not have adequate broadband service. Now, how do you start a business in a community if that community does not have rapid broadband or good cell phone service? And the answer is you don't, you can't, and that is one of the reasons why rural America is hurting so badly. We must invest in rural infrastructure, make sure that every community in this country has quality, affordable broadband. Mr. President, there is an opioid epidemic sweeping this country, impacting Vermont, my neighboring state, New Hampshire, West Virginia, Kentucky. All parts of this country are seeing people dying of overdoses from opioids and heroin. This is an epidemic that must be addressed. We can't simply walk out of here and leave communities all over this country without the resources that they need to treat people who are addicted and to prevent our young people from becoming addicts. We need to invest in treatment and prevention for the opioid epidemic. Mr. President, as we speak, there are over 30,000 vacancies in the Veterans Administration. And that means that we have got to make sure that every veteran in this country who goes to the VA gets the quality and timely health care that he or she needs. Can't turn our backs on the veterans. We've got to invest in the VA. Mr. President, the bottom line is that as much as all of us would like to get out of Washington and go home, we simply cannot turn our backs on tens of millions of working people and people in the middle class. It is not good enough to pass tax breaks for billionaires and then leave town. So I would hope, Mr. President, that the Republican leadership will immediately bring to this floor the legislation that we need to address the many crises facing the middle class of this country. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.